Some of the challenges we ran into, a physical environment. I mean, you really do need to consider these things before you start your session. If you are testing a tablet-based device and you have a tester and a recorder, and the tester has the tablet in front of them, you need to make sure the recorder can see what is going on that tablet, or has some other way of performing their tasks within the session. The session structure needs to be set up ahead of time. You can't just, not just the charter and those sorts of things, but what roles people are playing. You need to explain it to your test partner, and you need to make basically, you need to adjust your session timing accordingly if you need to sit down and spend 5 minutes before the session and that sort of thing. And then I have interrupts called out here because it's really important to communicate with your test partner what interrupts are okay and what interrupts you do need to actually maybe pause the session for, because when you pause a session, if you decide to pause a session at all, it still is going to take both of you now a few minutes to get back into the session, back into where you're going, and it's really going to be impacting your time a bit more. Another thing that didn't make it to the slides, debriefs cannot be put off. You have two people, you're very busy, but you need to sit down and debrief with a third person immediately after the session. I think this is pretty standard for any sort of session-based test management where you're doing debriefs, but it really does need to happen because two people go off, do their separate things, they come back, nobody remembers what really went on. Lastly, mentoring, a lot of the same benefits, all of the same challenges. Knowledge transfer definitely goes both ways. You're bringing new insight into your test sessions, somebody with fresh eyes into your product testing. It's really actually kind of enlightening. I would suggest it. It gives the student a practice space, a safe practice space with immediate feedback. And of course, the session framework makes a great, easy way to say, hey, let's schedule X block of time and we're going to do this, and this is the thing we're going to learn. Perfect. So, again, this is pretty much all I wanted to share. I just wanted to kind of get the conversation rolling. So, in conclusion, I think this has a lot of benefit for us at Omni, and I'd be happy to hear from everybody else about what you think. So, how are we doing here? You want to come on up?
Ed?
Two questions. How long is a session, and is one of the people responsible for the product spec reading in advance?
You can actually do any number of things with the session timing. We found that about an hour and a half was the max that we could do. Maybe 60 minutes of testing if we were lucky, and 30 minutes of either setup or entering bugs or whatnot.
Certainly when we started out, I think it's gotten a little better as we've gotten used to it, but initially it seemed to be a higher cognitive load than testing on your own. So if you normally did 90-minute sessions for solo session-based testing, you might find that 60 minutes is a long time to be in a pairing session, at least until you get familiar with the process. That was our experience. And it depends on the product. It depends on a lot of factors, how well people know the product. If it's two people who are very experienced with the same product, then it's probably easier than if one of them's newer to the product or something like that. What was the second?
The other question was the spec. We don't tend to work with very formal structured specs, so that hasn't been a particular role for us, but I could certainly see that being one of the roles, one person reading the spec, the other person driving the app, or it'd be something to try.
Michael Larson, New Thread. So in my environment, it's a little different. I'm a lone tester, as I'm sure that anybody who's read my blog knows, ad nauseum. So one of the things that I try to do is I try to include other stakeholders in my company into encouraging them to pair, whether that's customer support, whether that's somebody on the executive team, the design team, a developer, or anybody else. Do you find that you do this as well in your organization, or do you keep your pair testing sessions just to tester-tester? And if you do branch out into using other product owners, stakeholders, how do you structure your sessions to get the most benefit?
Well, I can say that in terms of structure, we've only been doing the session-based testing with tester to tester. But there have been a number of times where I have been in a more unstructured pairing where I might sit down with one of the user experience guys and say, this doesn't look right to me. Can we go through this? So in terms of how I would structure it, I think I would start out structuring it very similar, but I would definitely need to spend some time and explain the formal structure. We're not a terribly formal shop, so.
Okay, so kind of to follow on with the current topic, we do something a little bit different sometimes. We actually do pair testing that isn't just a pair. Sometimes you might think of it as team testing. We'll have developers and product managers also, and in those cases what we do is we'll have a more, it's not really a rigid outline, but we'll actually have a pre-formatted outline that we're going to use for the testing session. So we define what's the goal of what we're doing, how long we're going to be doing it, and we'll also set red flags. It's like, if you hit this, we will stop. If everything's cool, we'll go all the way to the end. So that's just another, I don't know if you've had any experience with that or not, where you've done pair testing concept with a session, but not just a pair. In this case, a basket full of pairs.
Yeah.
We haven't done it specifically with other roles, but one thing we did recently is one of our products actually is designed for a team of people to use together. And so we brought together 4 or 5 people to test that product on multiple devices and with someone watching server logs, and found that to be a really productive sort of team thing to duplicate sort of the team of users.
Anybody else on that thread?
I might add a tiny bit to that. When we did do that, that was a fairly exploratory session. It could certainly be done with a more formal outline, but we had a pretty basic charter because it was sort of one of those cases where we were just, it was our first real shot at testing it as a group. So we started pretty general and just used exploratory testing and sort of planned it as we were going.
But one of the things that we discussed at the end of that was it'd be easier to do it with a little more structure with that many people in the room.
Any new threads? Okay, new thread, please. Okay.
Again, it's still pairs, but one of the ways that I've been working with lately with my team is ultimately the pair testing session is a pair of testers, but what we do is we start out with a triad. So I'll come in and we'll set up, basically it's setting the structure, setting the goals. Then I'll leave after they get started, and occasionally check in, depending upon the length of the session. We'll do sessions from 30 minutes after the initial triad to as long as 2 hours. And depending upon what our goal is for the session, how often I'll check back in or whether I'll check in at all until the end. And then when we come to the end, the triad comes back together, and we'll not necessarily do an immediate debrief, but we'll take what we need from that. And then I actually have another team, well, it's actually myself and one of my testers, where we'll actually review our progress, because we'll set up a series of pair sessions throughout a week or a 2-week period of time. And then we'll actually review those. Sometimes it's daily, sometimes it's once a week. I was wondering what your thoughts are on that type of process.
That seems pretty good. If it works for you, I think is probably the answer there.
I think that may be something we should keep in mind as we bring on newer, less experienced testers. Right now, we have mostly experienced testers and one newer person that we're mentoring, and so that level of oversight seems a little heavy-handed, but if we had 2 newer testers, I think I would want that level of supervision. I don't like that word, but something like that.
I think also it has something to do with just the number of apps versus the number of bodies we have. Being able to reliably pull 2 people off, especially with vacations and stuff to deal with. Sometimes we'll have, one of our testers or 2 of our testers will be doing final release testing for something, so that knocks us down to 4 or 5, 5, and maybe someone's out on vacation, so now we're down to 4. And suddenly, every person you take away reduces your opportunities for pairing more than linearly, right? When you get down to 2 people, there's only 1 pair you can make, right? So.
Okay, well, then the stack is empty. Thank you very much, Kristina, Liz, and Steve.
Pair testing in sessions, Liz Marley, Steve Sandvik, and Kristina Sontag.